Welcome to It's What Our Characters Would Do, the podcast where a neutral good ranger and a chaotic neutral warlock talk about RPGs, roll funny dice, and give away some sweet loot. I'm Bob, World Builder.
And I'm Grease World Destroyer.
And today we're talking about underwater adventure.
The water level, everyone's favorite.
Exactly.
In any game.
And we're giving away some cool blue dice and a cool blue dice tray from Only Crits.
Oh, blue? You mean the color of water?
The water color.
Wow.
Blue flavor. But first, Grace, how you feeling today?
I feel great. I feel great because...
That just began exactly like the Chick-fil-A commercial that we hate. I don't know if you did that on purpose or not, but...
No, I didn't. But I feel great because Shadow of the Erdtree is out. Been waiting for that for months. It is amazing. It's beautiful. I love the landscapes, first of all.
The landscapes are very cool.
Yes, it is challenging. It recaptures the best feeling in the world of like fighting a really hard boss and then finally winning.
Yes, and this is the Elden Ring DLC.
Yes.
For any non-gamers out there. No, I probably wouldn't have known what this was if it weren't for you. So.
Any non-true gamers, And I've just been having a lot of fun with it. I mean, I've probably explored like 80% of the map at this point.
Yeah. Is it rekindling the magic of Elden Ring?
Yeah.
Playthrough 1?
It really does recapture the feeling of first
getting
arriving
pummeled by bosses.
Of first getting pummeled by the Erdtree Guardian in the first area of the game.
Yeah, I think that's all I did. I guess maybe you helped me get past it even. I don't remember.
I told you to sneak around it because it's a difficult fight for a beginner.
Okay.
Some people can do it. I couldn't do it. I probably still couldn't do it with a level 1 character.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is very good, and I'm enjoying it.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, you've been spending a good amount of time on there. It's, back to watching all these videos about the lore and stuff. It's fun to see your interests.
Yeah.
And just to watch it, because it is, like you said, pretty visually stunning, like the whole game. So, yeah, very cool to see. I've been good, too. I don't know. What's on my brain right now is just the topic of this episode, because it was the topic of a video that I made this week. And this is all related to Kraken Week, which I feel like, did I even mention that to you?
Oh, yeah, no, it was mentioned in...
one of the servers somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, basically Ginny D and Pointy Hat did the thing that a couple, creators we've chatted about, just like, hey, we should do something, blah, 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 like this for a long time. And yeah, the idea is literally just get a bunch of creators making videos about the same topics at the same time. And as sort of a fun collaboration, because a lot of people are, helping out with each other's videos, whether it's making stuff or just doing little clips or whatever. That's a part of it that I didn't really engage in at all, because even doing like little collaborations do take a lot of effort and time that I don't have right now working on Delve and everything. But yeah, it was really fun to think outside the box to like make a video about a specific topic, because usually my topics are pretty organic or like just based on something in the news that's going on. But this is, and I guess we just kind of get right into it. We're talking about underwater stuff. That's what Kraken Week's all about. Not just Krakens. But first week of July, everyone's posting videos about ocean stuff, underwater stuff. That's it. And, and as far as this podcast episode goes, I did put up a poll, and underwater stuff was just one of the subjects in there. I don't think I even mentioned Kraken Week in the poll, but nonetheless, this won. So the timing worked out well that this is going to come out on Patreon during Kraken Week, and just to have it all line up, put it out a week early on YouTube as well. So it'll go up same time as it does on Patreon on both platforms. Kraken Week, bingo bango, wet.
Yep, wet, just like the moon.
So, why don't we, now that I've already explained the whole thing, why don't we rewind and roll 3d6 to summarize the topic of this episode in exactly that many words. I feel like it's my turn to roll, your turn to... Yeah. It took me a minute to do that math. 13.
13. Inauspicious.
Is that your first word?
No. The water level is an integral part of every game. Everyone loves it.
Okay. Sarcastic, I guess. Yeah, so what's the deal with water levels, I guess? / watery adventures in general.
In video games, it's usually like the swimming mechanic is like not super smooth.
Yeah.
And it's janky and weird.
Yeah. That's pretty much how I introed my video on the main channel, is like, it's supposed to be weird. It's supposed to feel weird because it is a fish out of water scenario where you're the fish and the water in that metaphor is air, because you're out of the air.
What if you had a game where the whole thing is underwater and you're playing as like a fish, and then there's a dry land level?
A dry land level? Yeah. that would be exactly the inverse of this situation. And now you bring up another good thought right away, because this is what crossed my mind too. And I think it will connect to our discussion, especially related to tabletop stuff. But there are games where they're just underwater. Like one of your favorite recent games, I feel like, maybe not favorite, but Subnautica. You played a lot of it, right? All underwater,
yeah, the whole
right?
thing is one giant water level.
Yeah. And you have brief, moments in your little base or something where you can walk around.
Actually, that is true, because the parts on land in Subnautica are like the worst parts. Like they're so bad, so badly like programmed, I think, and just janky as all heck. So yeah, I guess that's a good.
So we already have a good
But
example.
I mean, what I was going to come into it right away was like, if the whole campaign is underwater, then it's like everyone's playing like mer people,
sure,
Sahwagan,
some kind of
whatever,
fish person,
just some kind of fish person.
Yeah.
So it's like you already have a swim speed, you can breathe underwater, so you don't have to worry about that. And like all your food and sustenance, like, is just what you already consume as a subaquatic person. So it's just like being on dry land. So
if you're playing that kind of person.
If you're playing that kind of person.
So what I was getting at is like, yes, even in tabletop games, the quote unquote water level experience of like having a short thing underwater where now you're just layering on a bunch of extra rules is usually kind of annoying. I think. Like, I feel like we've only done very little of it. Like, I was having trouble thinking of examples from personal experience.
Stephen the Animal did one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I wanted, so we can talk about that. We should talk about what these rules are, at least in like 5e. But I think if you're doing a whole campaign, even if you don't want to have everybody be fish person, I think generally in that case, like, it would be just a totally unsustainable campaign unless you hand wave a lot of those rules.
There's a bunch of magic items like Cloak of the Manta Ray and Necklace of Adaptation that make it so that you can basically be underwater as a regular person, except like that doesn't help you get like fresh water if you need that.
Yeah, I think that it's still an interesting like survival challenge, because you're basically like, you may as well be like on the moon, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you can't breathe, you can't find food or water. And there's no like real shelter. I mean, depending on what kind of underwater environment you're in, I guess shelter would also be a problem. So why don't we go back to like, what are the rules of underwater stuff in 5e? I was recently looking at this, and I feel like off the top of my head, we'll still have some trouble recalling it. So I'm curious what you might even remember off the top of your head.
Melee attacks are all melee attacks except piercing weapons are
very interesting. Yeah, go on. Very interesting.
I think all ranged attacks, non-magical ranged attacks, are a disadvantage. If you don't have a swimming speed, you just move at half your regular speed. You don't necessarily have to make athletics checks. Yeah. I don't remember if there's anything about armor in 5e, but I think in 3rd edition it was like if you were wearing heavy armor, you pretty much couldn't swim, you would just sink.
Okay. I don't know about the armor part, but everything else you're very much on the right track. Yeah.
I can't remember anything.
And that's the bulk of it, really.
Yeah.
That's the bulk of it. So
it just makes all combat and movement more annoying unless you're already suited to it.
It makes it harder for pretty much everyone. And okay, so basically just from the top, melee weapons, if you don't have a swim speed, you have disadvantage. And it could even be a magically induced swim speed. But if you don't have any kind of swim speed, you have disadvantage unless you're using, and this is the interesting part, there's just like 4 or 5 weapons. It's like daggers, spears. This is what I won't get off the top of my head. Daggers, spears, javelins.
Trident.
And I feel like there's one other one. But they are all piercing weapons. And I'm kind of giving some spoilers for video on Wednesday. But it's not like they just said disadvantage to melee except piercing weapons.
They specify
it's these ones
weapons.
Specifically. And it leaves out some ones that you'd think may as well be in that category. Like specifically the rapier is a piercing weapon that's not included in that list of exceptions.
And it seems like hydrodynamic or whatever. Like it's
right?
just very thin
and
light.
Then the other interesting part is for ranged weapons. And you again, pretty much had this one as well.
Are crossbows normal?
Crossbows are normal. And anything thrown like a javelin. And so it does list a few things, but that's like a very non-5e way to talk about a rule, right? Because it's specifically just giving you this like realistic, like, hey, you're launching this thing forward. And that's kind of the gist of why the piercing weapons are fine anyway. I think a short sword was one of those melee ones. That's fine as well. Because the idea is you're like lunging straight forward. That should work like in water, right? You're not swinging around with a slashing or bludgeoning thing. So from a realism standpoint, those things make sense. From a being able to remember them standpoint,
it
sucks.
It's so annoying.
It's garbage. So, but I can, without really detailing it, I gave some hints, I guess you could say, in the video. So I don't want to like give any more. I mean, I can't give more information here, but I have seen the 2024 rules for underwater stuff, and it is simplified a little bit. So it's nice, but it's still like far from perfect. Because another thing that this investigation of mine, like into underwater rules of not just D&D, but a bunch of other games revealed, was that at least of the games that we own, I looked at like about a dozen different games. D&D, of the ones that we own, D&D is the only one that includes rules for, like it has a section for underwater combat. Everything else like might have a rule for swimming, like you said, like half speed is like kind of common. And there's in about half of them, maybe actually probably far less than half even have rules for like holding your breath and then like suffocating when you stop holding your breath. But most of them don't tell the GM anything about like how to actually handle combat underwater. And this just ties into another interesting thing. Even in 5e, there's no commentary whatsoever. Again, at least as far as I could find in the rules, and apparently as far as other people could find in the rules, about spell casting underwater.
Does fire spells still work?
Everyone, if you're submerged in water, you have resistance to fire damage.
What about lightning damage? Does that electrify everybody in the area?
I feel like it should. But again, that's like a weird realism scenario. And because I would probably have like fire damage doesn't even work underwater because, well, unless it were maybe just like a source of heat, but like no actual fire.
It might be cool if for cold damage, like it also dealt piercing
like
damage.
Double even or something.
Or dealt piercing damage from actual like frost crystals forming in the water. That would be neat.
Yeah, so there's lots of interesting things you can do with magic. Like the one thing that I mentioned in that video. Sorry, this is just turning into like me breaking down a video that no one has seen yet. But that came up was with spellcasting in general. Again, from 5e perspective here, we got verbal components, we got somatic components, we got material components for casting spells. The one thing that Jeremy Crawford did address back in the days of him like responding to people on Twitter when people would just like say, hey, Jeremy Crawford, how does this actually work? What the heck?
Clarify this rule.
He responded to somebody saying that you can use verbal component spells underwater, but But once you do, then you're not holding your breath anymore if you had to, which seems fine because it's also never, I don't think ever stated that like a verbal component means anybody really, well, some of the spells do say like people have to hear you, I guess. But it's not like you're necessarily being perfectly articulate with these words, or it's like, is it even words? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like what, you can kind of interpret.
It's about the intent.
Yeah. You can kind of interpret the verbal component to be a lot of different things. So it makes sense that, you just have to like blurt out something. But then once you do, you're not holding your breath.
Now I want to make a spellcaster that just screams for every verbal component.
That'd be cool as hell.
Ah!
That'd be just like anime caster or something. Yeah. Legend of Zelda even. But what I thought of, which I don't know if has ever been addressed before, and I just kind of touched on this from a world building perspective of like, I wonder how this works. I don't want an actual answer because it would just involve more intricate rules that I would never remember. But about material components, because there are some spells that include water as a material component. So if you're like, that means, okay, water is therefore like a magical ingredient, at least considered in some spells. So casting those spells underwater, if you're adding a ton more water than you need, is that cool for the spell? Does it ruin the recipe in some way?
If the component required is holy water and you release that into the ocean, doesn't that make the whole ocean holy water?
I think according to the Catholic Church, yes.
Yeah.
But I don't know for sure. And I've got to tweet at the Pope for that one. And what was I going to say? Oh yeah, but then you're also basically adding this ingredient to every spell. So it's
every
like, does
spell
that ruin
becomes
every
wet.
recipe? Yeah. Is everything thrown off? Like surely for some it wouldn't really matter. And like thinking about it just in terms of like alchemy and stuff, you're also then not adding any air to any spells that you're casting underwater, which would kind of just be like implied as an ingredient to everything you're casting normally. Like think of our elements, right? Earth, air, fire, like all those things are, in some magic systems going to be important to like getting a spell to do the thing you want it to do. And that's just like completely thrown off if you're underwater. So again, I don't want any actual answers to that because unless it would just be something that I come up for my own like homebrew purposes, but I don't want a game to like give me that specific instructions. I don't think. Yeah. So, okay. Underwater adventures that we've actually played or ran.
Yeah. So the only one that I can think of is the one that Steven the Animal was running for our buddies at North Bay.
Okay. So was this part of the Ghost of Saltmarsh that we did?
No.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't remember actually
I don't think Ghost
anything.
of Saltmarsh involved that much actual underwater stuff.
Yeah, we were on boats and stuff. But yeah.
I'm talking like his homebrew.
Okay.
And there was a part where we had to go underwater to like a city of fish people. I don't remember why we had to do that. I think, and then we were immediately put in jail and put on trial for something.
Oh, that's kind of familiar.
But that wasn't really like relevant to it being underwater. But I think there was like a paling over the whole city that, like a giant bubble, pretty much. So it kind of like, other than getting down there, which to get down there, we had to go to this like magic salesman and he had to give us some like worms of some kind, some leeches that would allow us to survive the depths.
Neat.
But that was just to get down there. And then once we were down there, it was just like, okay, it's like dry land now.
Right.
Pretty much.
That's always interesting. I feel like that's not even uncommon in fictional universes where there's like some kind of Atlantis-esque city and it is just like everyone breathes air when they're actually in the city.
Yeah. I mean, in my homebrew, there is a mythical lost city of Atlantis. Atlontis.
Commonly mixed up, but yeah.
But no one, I mean, I've never had to actually run that because no one's ever actually gone there, but it used to have that type of thing. Oh, but then when it fell, Sahuagin basically like destroyed that magic and now it's all totally wet.
Like the moon.
Yeah. And it might be possible, like, if I ran an adventure there, it'd be like, it might be possible to reactivate that magic, but you'd still have to deal with the Sahuagin first.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I like that. Yeah, I don't think I've ever run anything that was even like a full session underwater. I know I've done some stuff on boats, but even that I think was a long time ago.
There was some stuff in Princes of the Apocalypse. There was a water dungeon for Alhydra, Princess of Evil Water. And I think there was a situation where there are these bubbles of water that can transport you to different parts of the dungeon. And someone like got in one by themselves and was carried across the dungeon. And the thing about these bubbles is you can't breathe while you're in them.
Really?
Yeah. So I think he started drowning.
Oh.
And then kind of meta, like someone went after him to save him, but then the issue was, no, he didn't start drowning in the bubble. He got transported to the portal to the plane of water, went in it, was immediately like blasted back out by Alhydra because I wasn't going to make him fight her by himself, still went unconscious.
And then was drowning.
And then the only way to get him back to the rest of the party where he could be healed was in one of these bubbles. And he, like, very miraculously survived. I think the person who went to rescue him was just doing repeated medicine checks. But the thing about drowning is you can't return to consciousness even if you succeed death saving throws.
If you're underwater, you shouldn't be able to,
you can't.
I feel like.
Like, it's basically like you keep making saves until you fail 3 and die, no matter what. And somehow, like, he managed to survive all of them and...
Yeah.
was revived.
And that's probably another element of why underwater stuff isn't very popular. Not just because you're layering on some extra mechanics. It's because, like, the margin for error becomes a lot smaller. You know what I mean? Like, oh, we accidentally got separated from the party. In a normal dungeon, that's still very dangerous. But in this, it was, like, pretty much instantly lethal.
Well,
like
if he hadn't gone through the portal, he might have been fine. But
yeah, but, like, getting knocked out, like we just said, you're pretty much guaranteed to die unless your party can pull out something really interesting here. And actually, that just reminded me. Tomb of Annihilation, room filled with wine.
Oh, yeah.
So this was a little spoiler for Tomb of Annihilation, maybe. There's a room on maybe the 3rd level, I don't remember, of the actual dungeon. That is a sort of a false treasure room. It looks similar to rooms that had very important stuff, but different, and different enough that your party realized, like, okay, this is probably not going to give us exactly what we need, but, like, for some reason, everybody was really bent on the idea that there was still some kind of treasure in here, or at least wanted to, I guess, just figure out how the trap worked, because you had also been, like, activating things, like, very briefly and realizing, like, things were kind of turning on, essentially, and then turning them back off. But yeah, it got to the point where one of the player characters was like, okay, I'm going to go in there alone, and basically, like, knew they were going to get sealed in this room, knew it was going to start filling with something. I don't think you knew what.
We figured it was wine because we could smell the wine.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, he assumed that his underwater breathing would function in alcohol. And then you were like,
alert. No, dude.
You were like,
not
no,
a chance.
You can't breathe.
Yeah, like if you put a fish in anything that isn't water, even the wrong kind of water, saltwater, freshwater, it's dead. So he tries that.
And then he was like, uh-oh.
And then is getting attacked by wine elementals, which you guys didn't know to
And
expect.
I think outside, we kind of had a meta game, like, logic conclusion of like, wait, this won't work. So we started trying to break him out, but he died.
Well, he didn't exactly.
He almost died.
He should have died, but he sacrificed. We probably talked about this on the podcast before, actually, because it was so cool. It's one of my, like, cooler memories. He sacrificed one of his, like, features as a warlock to his patron, saying, like, take this ability away from me, if you will, do this one favor for me. And the patron turned the wine into water, which he was then able to breathe by casting a spell, water breathing.
Yeah. And
I think at that point the wine elementals were dead. He was holding his own in that fight, I think.
Yeah, but he did that maneuver and to escape death like 2 more times.
Well, yeah. The problem was that in his backstory, that, like, I had pretty much forgotten this because this was a character that even came into the game late. But in the backstory, the only reason he had this patron was because they like saved the character's life at some point. And then, yes, again later, but he was hit with basically like a disintegration ray and was like, all right, if I sacrifice this very powerful magical item, like hold it in front of me, will it destroy that instead of me? And it was a thing that his patron like wanted him to destroy these items, or at least like the magic associated with these items. So I let that fly as well, but then realized later, like, okay, so wait, technically this character has narrowly escaped death by petitioning his patron 3 times. Yeah.
And then he did die in the final battle, and now that... So he wants to play that same character in the game that I'm running as his backup
but
character.
he survived, but he was saying that because he was also ultra
said he died.
aged, I think. Really?
Yeah. He and Aaron both confirmed that he died in that fight.
Okay.
So now the thing is like, Oobtao won't let him die.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, we're getting off topic.
Yeah, that was a good little story time, though. I like talking about this home game shenanigans. But yeah, we should probably take a little break, come back, answer some questions about underwater stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now it's time for a random encounter where we roll to read your stories and questions, generally about this topic. And the person who wrote our favorite story or question takes home some cool watercolored Only Crits merch. Woo!
2.
Hayden Bilbray. I haven't had to deal with an underwater encounter yet as a DM, but I do have a setup for one to occur in the world at some point. I wonder what the most common ways to deal with these encounters are, because under normal circumstances, obviously a lot of player attacks just wouldn't work underwater. I like the idea of giving players a means to create momentary airports, both for breathing and normal combat. What are other common approaches to underwater encounters? So, this is kind of back to our other discussion. I feel like it's, if you're only doing a brief thing, like one room of a dungeon is full of water, or maybe maybe it is even a dungeon that's kind of small scale, I say follow the rules, because that's when you're like indulging in this, oh, this is difficult and that's why this is interesting.
Except I would say just let all piercing weapons work.
Yeah.
Instead of having to go through the list with your players.
Yeah.
Just be like simple. If your weapon does piercing damage, it works normally, with the exception of a regular bow, because there's other problems with trying to use a bow underwater. But yeah.
And actually that was one I forgot to like fully explain. Ranged weapons are supposed to be basically just reducing the ranges. Remember how they all have a normal range and a long range?
Nobody can remember ranges in the first place.
Right. Well, you don't have to remember the numbers. That's not what I mean. It's normal, the weapon works normally. Long, you have disadvantage. And beyond long, you automatically miss. Underwater, you automatically miss in the long range and you have disadvantage in the normal range. But then still, unless you're using a crossbow or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. My opinion is if it's only a couple short encounters, embrace how much it sucks. That's like the point of the water level. To get your players to be like, dang, we don't want to experience that again, at least without some kind of benefit, kind of like is being described here. A way to create these air pockets or whatever. However, I think it is also cool to, in these encounters, even if it's like a room or something, provide, as Runehammer would call it, a treat. Where it's like, oh, if we grab this plant, we can absorb, a round's worth, or like 1d6 rounds worth of air. But there's only like this many of those things, or like they only appear so like in certain places or something. So yeah, make it so it's just like kind of embrace the resource management is how I would do it, I guess. Because you don't want it to completely suck. But otherwise, yeah, it should suck a little. That's kind of the point. That's my answer.
I guess it should suck a little bit in terms of it being inconvenient, but I don't think it should suck in terms of having a ton of like new mechanics to remember.
Yeah, you still got to make it.
It should suck.
You don't want to be looking
game,
through the rule book,
but not out of
just,
game.
Yeah, plan the encounter to the degree where you know exactly how it works. You can answer any questions and resolve things quickly. So if that means simplifying the rules to how, like we said, basically 9 out of 10 role-playing games handle it, where there are no special rules, and you're just probably have disadvantage on everything. Or you have certain checks like that you got to make.
Or just have like a little handout with the rules for everybody to reference. Just a little index card.
Yeah, it's got to be short still, though. Like, anyway. New question.
1.
From Mini Moose. I've never run a true underwater combat because I'm not sure how to handle the complexity of adding in the extra axis, yes, to the combat stage.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It is one thing to track a fight in a room on a balcony or an upstairs room or having a couple flying creatures, but to turn everyone in the combat into essentially flying creatures by swimming in the ocean depths, it seems very intimidating. The closest I've come was a fight with an aboleth in the sewer reservoir where players were trying to fight it from the walkway, and some of them got pulled in the water that it kept diving deeper into after attacking them. It eventually attempted to escape down a drain, but the PCs had killed the minions protecting the water controls and started flushing the water out of the cistern. They pursued it into the drain pipe, managing to kill it with a clutch banishment spell. So during the combat, I was really only having to track the altitude dimension for 1 or 2 targets at a time, but if it was all dozen combatants, that would have been chaos for me. And
Are there a dozen combatants?
Yeah, you probably have like 5 or 6 characters.
The minions. Okay, yeah.
A couple minions and the aboleth, yeah.
This is one of those things where it's like you just make it so movement doesn't really matter, so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I like. That's like what I say right at the end of my video on the main channel is like, and remember, like if you're in an open area, it's a 3D fight now. That does not work on a 2D grid, at least especially if you're playing on a VTT, where in person you'd be able to stack stuff up or whatever. But it's just you can't do it.
I think it becomes very cool when everybody has that third dimension of maneuverability.
Agree fully.
Because then it's not like some people are stuck on the ground and other people are flying. It's like everybody could be anywhere as long as it's within their regular movement distance, which is like kind of hand wave near. I can run over there.
The way that we handle it, it's freaking cool. The way that most people handle it, when you're playing 5e too.
That's because our fun is the correct fun.
I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to be the one to say it. But yeah, I think in that case of a 3D match, you got to throw out the grid.
Or just get a 3D grid.
Right.
Have a cube with little 5-foot boxes.
Yeah. I mean, and actually, in what is it? Tailspire that exists, the new D&D VTT that's going to exist. Those are 3D. You could actually have everybody floating around. That would be fine.
That's cool.
Yeah. So I assume there'll be, again, I guess I don't know how it would work with like, how do you like end your turn? Like, is everyone perfectly buoyant? Then you probably would want to think about like, okay, if you're in heavy armor, you actually can't just fly around. Like 0 chance that you can just carry yourself swimming that way.
Then you have to think about, okay, how quickly do they sink each round?
Yeah.
I mean, their movement speed's already halved.
Yeah. So. I mean, to again, keep it simple, I would probably be like, okay, anybody with anything but light armor, you're just on the ground. And or there could still be multiple levels of like, rock built up that they're on or something. But whatever. Yeah, we're kind of getting
coral. Then you're adding climbing mechanics.
Climbing's a lot easier than swimming. It kind of works the same way.
Climbing is easier underwater too, right? So I would say if you're climbing underwater, it should be normal speed.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, whatever. We don't have
even
to get
if you're
into
wearing
that.
heavy armor, like you're still being.
Yeah, you're being lifted up somewhat. Like
some degree.
Your body is being lifted up, but the armor's not. I don't know. 4 would be here. From Bruno Fernandez. We didn't vote. Oh, I didn't vote, in the poll about the topic for this episode, but I am happy that the option I would have chosen won. I never did an underwater. Okay, so what I'm learning is no one actually plays underwater combat because this person didn't either. But the next dungeon my players will face has both, a flooded room and a river that cuts the dungeon and is one of the possible paths. I'm going to use the combat at the river part as a way to introduce Ryoko's guide, Crustacean Race, and make it available for players from now on. As of now, 2 players have a swimming speed, 1 racial, 1 from Mariner's armor. And with the official rules being so forgiving about holding your breath, I think it is pretty possible some underwater combat occurs. So I will greatly appreciate the next video.
Thanks.
Yeah. And you know what? That's actually a cool way to rationalize the what I was thinking actually does exist underwater, a martial caster gap, because it was like, oh, you can pretty much cast spells normally, like there's no rules against it, whereas all weapons, like range ones, are all trash now. Melee weapons, 2/3 of them are trash now. But yeah, you actually can't cast probably 2/3 of spells have a verbal component. I feel like that's the most common component, right? Maybe somatic is hand motion stuff, but yeah, because at least non-catchers are able to hold their breath as long as they want. Pretty much in 5e, it's like really not that significant when you're talking rounds of time, but casters can't do that. So I don't know. But yeah, flooded room in a dungeon, cool. River that cuts through it and is a possible path through the dungeon, also cool ideas. So I like that.
6 or 5. Sticky icky slap shot.
I ran a realistic one-shot, and a fight broke out, and an NPC fell off a bridge into water. The player kept throwing punches that basically did no damage because I thought things don't move as fast underwater. Correct?
Well, you'd be correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and by 5e, the bludgeoning damage,
it wouldn't be at half damage.
It wouldn't reduce damage. It would give disadvantage to hit, but it's like
either way, whatever way you did it, damage anyway. Fine. You would only hit half the time if you were rolling with disadvantage.
Oh my god!
Statistically, so
the NPC choked out the player, and the player died. Player character, but still, the player was not happy at all. He didn't think about choking because it wasn't on his character sheet. Yeah, I felt bad and saved the player in the end, but I bet you would have handled that encounter much differently and much better. Well, no. What would you do differently? So
I mean, it would have been grappling.
Yeah, because like strangling in general, I don't know if we've ever had anybody just try to do that.
But it'd be grapple, and then you would get to contest the grapple every round.
Yeah.
So you have plenty of chances to escape, but I don't know if I probably would not permit strangling in an encounter like that. Because that's the same to me as like a called shot, which I don't allow. Unless the party is okay with monsters also being able to do called shots, as in cutting off your limbs and hobbling you and things like that.
I think it would just have to be really hard and would still probably take too long for a regular combat
it would take
to choke
minutes.
someone.
It would take minutes to choke someone out in D&D.
So. I don't know.
Because you can hold your breath. Or not breathe for a number of minutes equal to your Constitution modifier.
Oh, that's true.
So if you're like a barbarian with a high con, you have 5 minutes to escape a grapple.
So just thinking about the regular suffocation mechanic, even if they're being choked, as long as they had air in their lungs, I guess, they can still be technically holding their breath while being choked.
Yeah.
For a
I would
long
allow
time.
Strangulation on something that was already defenseless. Like if it was asleep and you could have just coup de grace them, but you decided to take them out with your hands and strangle them instead, I would allow that. But I don't know. I probably just would not have.
Yeah. And but overall, this also goes back to something I mentioned in the video where suffocation mechanics have been called like a good dividing line between rules light and rules heavy games, because it's just something that like, at least like the holding your breath element of it, everyone just kind of inherently understands. You know, like, do we need a rule to tell us how long we can hold our breath? But I said in the video that still having at least a suffocation rule is helpful kind of for this scenario, because it is kind of quickly a life or death thing that you're going to have to make a ruling on. And so, yeah, like you went with your gut and that's how it played out. That's what the GM's supposed to do.
It sounds, obviously the player wasn't happy because their character died, but it sounds like a very dramatic moment.
Yeah. And like a memorable encounter for sure.
Yeah.
So like, don't, brag on yourself for that. But
I think I would have appreciated that as a player.
Now remembering that, there are like, there's suffocation mechanics, there's holding your breath mechanics. I would have, if I had the foresight, would try to look at that if someone was going a route of trying to strangle a monster or getting strangled. Yeah. Last one. From Kevin Broussard. When running underwater or in any weird environment, how do you balance adding restrictions with making things fun? I found that if I say my players have disadvantage on a bunch of things, they don't see it as a challenge, but as something getting between them and playing the game as they normally would, which they enjoy.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I mean, you can just hand wave it all with some kind of magical item if you don't want to deal with these mechanics, which, yeah, it's not... I think underwater campaigns or sessions, whatever, are cool because it lets you play with a different type of setting. It's a whole new setting. Even in the same regular setting that you use, underwater is like a whole different world.
Yeah.
So I think it's cool to allow players to explore that, but if they're the type of players that are focused more on exploring than grittiness, then it's fine to give everybody like a magical bubble suit that makes it so they can move and breathe normally.
Because it is basically just layering on survival mechanics that otherwise in 5e are ignored by almost everyone. Like no one counts rations. No one, how much water do you have in your water sack, whatever it's called?
Do I have enough arrows?
Yeah. No one does that stuff on land.
Is my backpack too heavy?
But according to the rules, you should. So underwater, why do we feel like we need to, hold these rules to a higher standard?
That's a good point.
So we probably should, everyone should just be hand waving it as they do all of the on land survival mechanics anyway. But yeah, my stance from like the previous question about this is if it is something brief, like a room in a dungeon or a simple encounter, that is the challenge then. Just being underwater is the challenge. Just as like when you're at level 1, how do we climb this huge, vertical wall? Like that's a challenge at certain levels, right? So yeah, in the absence of the magical things that can get around it easily, those challenges can be fun. But when you extend it to like a whole long dungeon or a campaign or like a whole, mini arc of a campaign or whatever, yeah, it's just going to get annoying and you got to erase those survival mechanics like you do with everything else.
Yep, that is the solution. Just don't do it.
Just don't do it. It always comes back to that. If it is not fun, it shouldn't be part of your game. If it's a challenge and it's a fun challenge, then heck yeah, that's like the point, right?
Just like Elden Ring.
Just like, yeah.
If you're getting frustrated going up against a boss and it's not fun, use the sword that spams an AoE that bosses can't dodge. Yeah. Summon your ashes. Use the things that the game provides to make it fun.
Yep.
You live in a magical world. You can have a sword that is easy to swing underwater. You can have gillyweed. You can have magical...
The leeches.
You can have magical leeches. Yeah.
Okay. And for sharing our favorite story/question, this episode's loot winner is Sticky Icky Slapshot for the epic tale of learning the hard way as a GM and knowing when certain rules are going to really be in your favor and when certain rules should be ignored. You're going home with some cool dice and a dice tray from Only Crits. Woo!
Yay!
If you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend and crunch that like button. Please subscribe and consider supporting the station directly by joining as a YouTube channel member or as a patron. Our members and patrons get early access to every episode, and patrons get other cool rewards, including private RSS link to listen to your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for your support, and keep building.
Stop building.